Okay, everyone ready?
And we're live, Councillor.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Communities and Partnerships Committee on the 3rd of September 2020. I would like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Council's website. Members, you are by now aware of the need to keep your video camera switched on for the duration of the meeting and to keep your microphone muted except when I invite you to speak. Please click the raised hand function if you wish to ask a question or comment. There is always a risk that we may run into technical problems, and I would ask for your patience if we do. Should this occur, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault, the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. Can I remind members and officers that all virtual meetings will be recorded? Members, I'll begin by calling the names of all members of the committee to establish your presence. Please confirm that you're present when I call your name. Councillor Ashwood.
Present.
Councillor Batchelor.
Present, Chair.
Councillor Costello.
Present.
Councillor Every.
Present.
Councillor French.
Present.
Councillor Nieto.
Present.
Councillor Scott.
Present.
Councillor Smith.
Present.
Councillor Taylor.
Present.
And myself, Councillor Criswell. So we move on to the first item, apologies for absence. Nick, do we have apologies, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. There are apologies from Councillor Machini and Councillor Scott.
Thank you. So welcome, Councillor Scott. And declarations of interest, members. Do any members have interest to declare disclosable pecuniary interests or non-statutory disclosable interests? I see no hands, so no interest to declare as far as we know. If anything arises during the meeting, members, then please declare at the time. Thank you. So we move on to item 2A, minutes of the meeting held on the 6th of August 2020. We're being asked to approve the minutes of the meeting as a correct record. Can I please ask members who do not agree with the proposal to use the raise hand function, or those that have any questions, please, about the minutes? I see no raised hands, so I'll assume that those minutes are approved. Thank you very much, members. So item 2B is the action log. So can I hand over to you, please, Adrian Chapman? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Morning, councillors. There are no significant updates in the action log from that was published. Most actions are ongoing. Can I just draw your attention, though, to the second action against 292 on page 5. This was the briefing note relating to the support available to people who need to self-isolate. We haven't yet circulated that briefing note. There are still some refinements being made with our district council colleagues to the model of support to be provided to people in that situation. And in fact, there is an update included in my COVID report for today. But just for the avoidance of doubt, anybody that finds themselves needing to self-isolate and needs help and support will be able to get that from the local authority or from one of our partner hubs. And that briefing note will come round as soon as we've finalised the finer details of the arrangements with districts. As I said to the committee before, if you come across any residents at all that you find in need, please just let me know direct, and I'll make sure that they get the support and help that they need. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Adrian. Any questions on the action log, members? Please indicate. One question. Councillor Batchelor, Henry.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question on item 260. I was going to ask, are the details of this not covered in the item we have on the agenda today on the Think Communities, or is the report that's going to come back to us independent of this?
Thank you, Councillor Batchelor. You kind of read my mind, actually. I was going to suggest that we do close that down today, but I felt we ought to run the report first today and then take a view on whether or not members felt satisfied that that had addressed that action. But I tend to agree with you, actually, that if members are content after that item has been covered today, that we then record that as a closed action. Thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you. Any other points, members, on the action log? Nobody indicating, so thank you very much. So we move on to item 3, petitions and public questions. There have been none submitted to this meeting. So we'll move straight on to item 4, which is the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Coroners Service Annual Report. And we have the Assistant Director of Regulatory Services, Peter Gell, here to present. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you. Morning, Chair, and morning, councillors. So you've got your annual report before you. What I thought I'd do is pick out some of the highlights from that report. I'm very happy to answer any questions that you have after that. A few things I think just worth pointing out. First of all, it's a joint jurisdiction across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. It was formed back in August 2015 with the coroner we have now and Senior Coroner David Hemming. David would normally be here today, but he's actually got an inquest today, so he gives his apologies. I think it's probably worth just covering briefly the scope of the service, and that is covered within sort of 1.2 of the report. So it's an investigation into deaths which are unexpected, unexplained, or whether it's suspected that the deceased has died in a violent or natural death, or whether cause is unknown or deceased dies while in custody or state detention. So that could include, for example, when in custody within a police cell. That could include a death within a prison. So the position itself is an independent judicial post. It's appointed by the council but not employed by the council, and to appoint the coroner you need the approval of the chief coroner, who sits over the service across the UK, and the Lord Chancellor. I think it's worth also highlighting the complex jurisdiction nature that we have across Cambridge and Peterborough. And by that, we have 4 hospitals, as you'd be well aware, and 2 of those are sort of very much leading in their fields. When we're talking about Outbreaks and Papworth. And that is really significant, really, as far as the colonial service is concerned, because some of the matters and some of the areas that they're pushing the boundaries as far as technology and what they're doing in trying to find new solutions and again, looking after people's health, you will inevitably get where you're pushing the boundaries, deaths that require investigation. Some of those can be highly complex because you're looking at leading surgeons and consultants involved in those. We've also got a number of prisons, 3 in fact, across our piece. And again, each of those or any deaths within prison needs an investigation. We had 5 prison deaths in the last 12 months. That just gives you an indication of the sort of numbers that we deal with, and each of those takes longer potentially than a lot of other cases. To give you an idea, roughly across the county, on average, it's probably around 4,000 deaths a year, 14% of which are referred to the senior coroner. And then in 2019, just under 17% of those referrals had an inquest, with 43% of those themselves requiring post-mortem. So it's just a brief outline of some of the context of the service. And again, that was recognised recently by the chief coroner, who very much saw that there are very much some complexities and some challenges that we have that are not mirrored by a lot of locations. Really now, just moving some highlights from the main report itself. I think one of the things I wanted to just highlight initially is the coroner's case management system sort of portal referral, and that's really key because in the past, a lot of those referrals that came into the service were phone calls that requires answering, record taking. But actually, there's been a system that's been rolled out last year, included our 56 GPs. What that meant is those referrals can come in through a digital portal. Now, a number of other cranial service areas are doing that, but not all. And certainly it's one of those things where I think we've been leading the way as a service, and that frees up some of the capacity to then deal with other matters and creates a convenient means for GP surgeries, hospitals, in order to for that information. And recently that's also been rolled out to Peterborough and Hitchinbrook hospitals, literally within the last few days. And again, you see within the report it mentions we're trying to achieve that by October. So we're there with that. Other things we're always looking to work closely with a range of partners, and clearly there's information that can be gained from looking at trends with deaths. And it's important where we find challenges and problems that we work with partners to try and find solutions and ways that we can support areas. And one of those is actually through real-time surveillance portal that's been introduced. This is public health led, but we're certainly one of the partners that are feeding into that. All the data protection rules have been covered off, but what that does again is enable a more holistic picture around suicides and deaths for those partners to help work together around interventions that again can try and stop people ending up unfortunately going down that path. Partnerships are really key, and there's a number highlighted within the report, but just one of the ones I just wanted to point out, which again is pretty much unique for the service here, is with the Crown Prosecution Service, and that's enabled a trainee solicitor. And we've had the second one now actually to come and have as a comment with the team. That doesn't cost us as a service, but it provides us some additional capacity. It helps them develop their training towards becoming a solicitor. And I think that's a partnership that works for both parties, and that's something that David Hemming has been very good at supporting others again in developing their staff, and that sort of relationship works further down the line, as we're seeing with the medical examination scheme that we've been supporting as well. As far as sort of COVID-19, Connor's office brought back into court replacing support for service volunteers. What this is about, we have support for those that go into inquests, and again, because of COVID and people having to isolate, some of those volunteers that we had very much ended up shielding themselves. And what that did is meant that we needed to then bring in some of the officers back into court. And I think that's been a positive sense in that respect, because it ensures those that have been involved in some of the investigations that support the criminal service actually seeing some of those cases through to the end. And these officers that have that relationship from early days with sort of the deceased families, and it's been able to maintain that, which I think has been a positive as far as our overall support. Does also mean though that we can still use the support from the volunteers in the future, but actually be more in a sort of pastoral sense, again helping other forms of support and access to those. But I think as far as a service, I think that's enabled us to rethink one of the things, the way we're operating in the past, and make improvements. Like all services, we have a number of challenges, so I thought it would just to pick a couple of those out for you. One of which, and I think it's been mentioned previously, was the number of cases that we receive within the jurisdiction. We've currently got sort of 113 over a year old. Now, some of these cases will take longer than a year to resolve anyway. Some cases are very much put on hold because of police criminal investigations, and they have to take their course before these can initiate. There has been a delay, as you would expect, as a result of COVID, which pretty much overnight stopped jury inquest in the early days of the lockdown, and sort of the impact of that really, I believe, is around sort of 14 additional inquests that weren't able to progress. And also one of the priorities for the service is to get those numbers down, and probably just to give you a flavour of work that we've been doing there, and some of this will cut across other parts of this report. But it's part of it's around the availability of the coroner service, the officers themselves. So we have a chief coroner as a permanent post, but we've very much been reliant upon assistant coroners. Assistant coroners generally will have their own practice or be part of a solicitor's firm, or could be a barrister in another time. So what they're trying to do is marry two jobs and roles together. That provides challenges as far as timetabling of inquests, and again, having that longer term confidence that we've got the availability of the resource. So that's something we'll touch on it again a bit later, how we've addressed that. But so we've been looking at getting in more provision as far as coroners to be able to undertake the work, and more courts that we can run concurrently. As far as accommodation, that is something we've looked at very early on within sort of COVID and the lockdown, and it's not been the case across all jurisdictions. Again, something that became apparent talking to the chief coroner at recent interviews. And what that is, and is enabled us to get up and running again quicker than most authorities. We're clear with inquests, certainly with juries that stopped very early days. We're keen to, as soon as possible, to be able to open up some of our accommodation facilities to be able to run inquests again. And that's something we did certainly with Peterborough, to have a location at Peterborough Town Hall as north of the county, as we've done here with Huntington Town Hall further south. And that was important to work to enable those to be opened up in a COVID secure manner, working very much with the property teams around that, and probably setting the way and establishing the risk assessments and models that other services have followed as they've come online further down the line. But that was very much about enabling us to get up and running as soon as possible. We're also very much aware that because of the number of cases that we needed to run multiple venues at the same time. So again, it's about putting additional capacity into place as a result of that. Now, we have in the past also had cases in law courts. Now, they were starting to get cancelled on us previously because criminal cases take priority, and there is a lack of provision within the law court system. Now, as a result of COVID, then we're very much having to ensure we have other facilities available, because we're expecting more and more of our cases that were timetabled to be heard in criminal courts to basically be removed from their basically just for lack of capacity and, say, other priorities. From a staffing perspective, obviously we've seen from April this year there was a slight realignment of services, again very much remaining within age and service area, but the coronial team came within my regulatory services group, and I think there's an appendix within the report that details that. But it now also sits with other services such as the registration service for the county council, the shared trading standard service, again across the sort of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and some environmental health functions and licensing. So one of the things that we were hoping to do early on in the year that did get delayed because of COVID, but we've now successfully completed, was the recruitment of an area coroner. So an area coroner is different to assistant coroners in that it's a permanent appointment. It gave us an opportunity during COVID very much to reflect on the structure that we had and the challenges we're facing, and to put something in place that we felt very much puts us in a better position to meet the challenges ahead. So actually what we were able to do is to put in place, and again, this is very much looking at the demand we had, but 2 permanent posts from an area coroner position, and this will give us the sort of robustness, the consistency, and actually enables us to look very much around the succession planning going forward. All these areas that I think had weaknesses in the past, and as I say, that recruitment took place recently. Again, we're very much with Adrian was involved in that, and David Hemming, so our coroner, and the chief coroner again came down very much for those interviews. It was pleasing to hear as well that he said that having sat in many of those interviews for area coroners, that what we basically attracted was a high calibre of applicants, much higher than he'd seen in some other areas, and he felt there's a number of factors that impacted on that, and one is because of the complex nature of this, is a real opportunity as far as their own sort of career development. I think also it's testament to David Hemming, our senior coroner, and that a number of applicants particularly wanted to work with him, which again is pleasing for us with our sort of shared jurisdiction and service to actually see. One of the impacts that we have seen because of the recent lockdown, and I think it's been mirrored across many services, is actually a reduction in sickness amongst staff. So I think we've seen in general an increase in well-being, say lower sickness rates, and in some ways an increase in productivity. As we know, all things can't be done as effectively from home, but we have seen some benefits through some of the team travelling less, of giving that additional time that they can do rather than sitting in a car or whatever means of transport in order to get to work. And it's also enabled us again to very much focus on sort of training and development, because we do see actually, you know, the biggest asset to any service are its staff, and we do see everything from induction right through to the more senior staff, ensuring we keep, you know, provide the adequate training, and we keep them actually up to date with changes, and best practice is really important to us. And we're just about to embark on a skills sort of matrix where we're very much identifying so all the strengths, skills, key attributes that we have within our team, and where those gaps are, and that's quite important for us going forward as far as our own sort of staffing development plans. Just a brief thing to say on finance, really, that there is a split between a 65-35 split between how the service is funded between the county and Peterborough. This year the budget was increased by both authorities, and that's largely reflective of the increase in numbers of cases that we get, and also the increase in particularly complex cases. So we have a number, as I say, that themselves will probably take over 12 months, even following the initiation of the investigation, to conclude. And that is the numbers that we're getting of those really complex cases is quite unusual. And typically, where you may have one every 4 years, we've had sort of 3 or 4 within a year. So that's something particularly to note. as far as performance, there is a performance table that you can see includes caseloads under 2.6. What you've got there is some opened and then closed cases, and what you will see is a general increase in most years between 2010 and 2019 in the number of cases. What I will add is that the balance figure below, there are some errors in that, and I'll ensure that the correct figures are provided for the minutes. And we've already mentioned really the slight delay as a result of COVID in the cases. We've also seen a reduction, I would say, in some of the simpler cases, and that's really because of the medical examiner service that's been introduced, and that is really it's a level of independence within hospitals to oversee deaths within the hospitals themselves to ensure that there aren't any untoward trends, sort of Howard Shipman sort of scenarios where there's deaths reoccurring. So what that has meant really, that the things in the past which may have been referred to as in some cases simple, they've been able to look in the hospital for the medical examiner service and determine actually this doesn't need referring, we can determine the cause of death, and that doesn't need to go to the coroner. On the other side of it, they've also looked at, and doesn't mean there's anything untoward, but they've also looked at some cases which they've seen are highly complex, and they do consider there should be further investigation by the coroner. So we have seen a shift really of simple to more complex cases as well. Really just gives you, again, sort of further highlight really of some of the impacts of COVID. So early days, as we said, the inquests had to stop. We did then very much start to use, as we've been doing here on Zoom, technology to enable us to conduct inquests that we could where it was possible to do a number in that manner, and we did that quite quickly. I think, again, a number of authorities were quite slow to take that up. We did as a service, as you would expect, see an increase in the deaths reported and a number that were linked to COVID initially. I think pathologists came better understood further down the line those that were related and those weren't. So I think there was an improvement in what was referred to as time went on. We've also, as part of the work I said, working with facilities to get more accommodation online to undertake hearings, we also supported Huntington, for example, Town Council in relation to some of their IT infrastructure to ensure that we have the adequate IT to enable sort of conferencing facilities and things to take place. And we've had some problems previously, and I think that now is working well. And we've undertaken 103 live hearings, including pre-inquest review hearings and final hearings during COVID, which again is quite a significant number. So briefly then, really sort of looking ahead, what are some of the key ambitions for the service? We're clearly very keen to address the numbers that we have that we want to hear, and there's a lot of work, as I say, gone into with the area coroners, ensuring we've got still sufficient assistant coroners where required to provide the capacity from a staffing perspective and expertise to deal with those and the sites. But very much looking at some of the I suppose the costs and things around the service. There is an aspiration around, again, this is very much dependent upon whether the business case would state it's economically viable. But this links into really one of the recommendations is asking for support to ask the transformation team to undertake a piece of work looking at whether the council has a shared facility for sort of mortuary inquest pathology facility. Now, there are a number of localities across the country that do that. It's a minority, to be honest, but actually looking at the costs at the moment, we do not have an opportunity really to bargain. We end up using mortuary facilities in Peterborough Hospital and Adderbrooks, and we're pretty much reliant on the costs that they offer to us. So I think it's very much worth us pursuing this as an explore to see whether this would work for us financially and practically, having our own facility, and whether there is a market between other local authorities also buying into that. So that's one of those areas I would suggest we consider exploring. I've had an initial conversation with the transformation team, and they would be happy to support that piece of work if members were minded to approve it. The second was really around technology, and I think everybody's probably very conscious that the legal world has a lot of papers, and the coronial service is no different to that. A lot of the investigations, or again, a lot of paperwork, a lot of things have to go to court, a lot of copies. And now there is technology in the service, as we've heard, as far as referrals, and I think, as I say, we're leading the way with some of that. I would like to see whether there's more that can be done, and I know in certain criminal jurisdiction areas they are trying out different technology to try and reduce the paperwork, try and streamline the efficiencies of the service. And that's the second area I would seek some support from, really, to see if there is technology out there that can help improve the efficiency of the service. And I think there's a bit of research there that would be helpful if the transformation team could do to assist us. So that's a very quick run through of the paper. Very happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. Very comprehensive report. So thank you very much for that. Members have previously obviously been concerned about the historic backlog of cases and the historic overspend. So really good to see that we've got more capacity now, and we've increased the budget to hopefully deal with that overspend in future. So thank you, members. Open to questions. We've got Councillor Nieto. Lena.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Peter. That was a very comprehensive report. And I just had a couple of questions. I wanted to know if it would be possible to, or if maybe you already have it and you haven't mentioned it, but do we have like a target or a working plan to reduce that percentage of unnecessary referrals, and also understand kind of the root cause of those referrals? And the other one was, we have a 30% target, but you say, it says in the report that it's difficult to achieve it because of the complexities. Do we have like also an action plan to achieve this target, or is this target unrealistic? Thank you.
Yeah, probably taking the second point first, really. I think the target in that sense is realistic. There's no real reason why that target is set at that particular level. It's a very general benchmark, and I think, as the Chief Coroner sort of expressed recently, that that was probably relevant to many areas, but not to those with complex cases. Now, we've probably heard there's an area coroner sort of model review that's been planned. Now, that's been put on hold at the moment due to COVID, and what that was very much going to do is look at things such as that number there to see whether that's still appropriate, whether to add additional criteria or other performance indicators or measures where you have got areas such as the cells which are quite complex, or something which would be more relevant and appropriate. So I'd say it's certainly something that we should be mindful of and be aware of. And I think what I would say is, rather than again just try and work towards a particular figure, I think the aim has always got to be is to do as well as we can. So if the figure is 13, we can get to 25. Let's get to 25. That's not just set ourselves a barrier at that extent. As far as referrals, I don't think that at the moment there aren't really unnecessary referrals of the things that we're seeing. I think David, as the senior coroner, spent a lot of time, and again a lot of time with the hospitals. Actually, it's one of the things he's been doing recently. Is so those that are making the referrals actually understand what falls within our scope. And I think that was certainly a very good question, because in the past that has very much been the case. We spent time investigating or starting to look at things to determine actually that should not have come to us. I think the referral rates now are pretty good. I think it's just a case of the numbers that are due, and I think there's also partly a result of there's been some change in guidance nationally that also ensures that there's more now that in fact can fall within our remit. And again, the Chief Coroner will update various guidance intervals, and COVID was a good example, that because they were quite keen to see that coronial services weren't used as a means for sort of judicial review type scenarios where people are trying to challenge employers for not putting measures in place, and the coronial service being used as a vehicle around that. So the Chief Coroner's guidance is very helpful. It's something that is updated on a regular basis, but also it helps define the sort of level and content of things that come within it. So I know I explained earlier sort of that the broad areas which would mean referral, obviously underpinning that's quite a lot of detail. And so I think I'm pretty confident those that we're getting are those genuine sort of numbers that we should be investigating now.
Thank you. Chair, if I may, I just wanted to say that I welcome, Peter, that your directorate is looking at how we can kind of, proactively include and research the inclusion of technology, because I think that's kind of the way forward, and that's where society is kind of going towards, and we have to make the most of it. So I welcome that that you're very proactive on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Lena. Thank you, Peter. Yes, targets are very important, of course, and we must absolutely be as efficient as possible, but we mustn't lose sight of the fact that we also want to provide the best possible service to bereaved families. So anything that helps that is very much to be welcomed. Got Councillor Batchelor next. Henry.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, just a quick question on recommendations B and C. Yeah, fully support what's being sought after here. I was just going to ask, is it possible to have a report back once both of these have been investigated to the committee, just so we're kept in the loop?
Absolutely. I think we're very much keen to get the committee's view on those and the way forward. This is really an opportunity to help inform the committee of options for the service going forward, but very much we would seek and want to get your guidance on the way ahead in that respect.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, that's important, Henry. Thank you. Councillor Smith, Mandy.
Thank you. Basically, thank you for the report. Very comprehensive, very good. Sorry if I missed this, but do we get funding from external sources, or is it all within the county council?
The funding is from the council, and it's one of those. It is a challenge.
Yeah.
Probably one way to look at this, if for my other hat on with other regulatory functions. So if this was trading standards, we do, for example, have options about what we put before the courts. That ultimately is a council decision. We have to decide what's proportionate in relation to criminal investigations. Now, because effectively the coroner is a judicial post, if the matters that are required to be investigated and they do require medical experts and those things at times, we don't have a lot of freedom in relation to the costs that are incurred. So very much why I'm keen to explore whether it's technology, whether it's looking at other mortuary provision, whether it's getting the best value that we can through our contracts, but ensuring at least those where there's limited choice, we still have contracts in place that control the expenditure. So we are doing what we can in relation to finances, and I'm very keen that we're as efficient and effective as possible. And again, that's everything from things like staff training help to ensure that. But really, just to answer your question, we haven't got access to external funding as other services will have, or an opportunity to raise external revenue, unless potentially we have our own facility, and that would pay for itself potentially over a number of years, and then bringing funds into the service.
Thank you. If I can just briefly, I wasn't suggesting that you weren't trying to get best value for money. I wasn't at all. I know you are, etc. It's just a question I just wondered. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mandy. So Peter, we have a statutory duty to deal with all cases that are referred to us, really, don't we? It's as simple as that, I think.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. I can't see any further members indicating questions or comments. So thank you, Peter. We'll move to the recommendations, members. So to note the work of the coroner service, to ask the transformation team to explore by means of a business case the viability of the council investing in its own dedicated mortuary, pathology and inquest facility, and to ask the transformation team to identify and evaluate technological enhancements that will improve the efficiency and effectiveness of the coroner service. So please indicate, members, if there's any dissent. Otherwise, I'll assume we're all happy with the recommendations. I have nobody indicating, so thank you very much, members. Those recommendations are agreed. Thank you very much, Peter.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just give my sort of apologies now because I've got to go to a public health board meeting, so I will sort of exit for the meeting. But thank you, members.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you. Okay, members. So we move on to item 5, which is the Cambridgeshire County Council response to COVID-19. Given the rapidly changing situation and the need to provide the committee and public with the most up-to-date information possible, I have accepted this as a late report in order to allow it to contain the most up-to-date information possible and to enable the committee to be briefed on the current situation in relation to the council's response to COVID-19 for those services for which it is responsible. And presenting the report is Adrian Chapman. Over to you, Adrian. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Criswell, and hello again, everyone. So I guess I'd start by just saying and reminding everyone that the pandemic is still very much with us, and as a consequence of that, our work in the county-wide hub feels as manic as ever, to be honest, but in a great way. It remains a huge privilege to be doing what we're doing. And I just wanted to update on 3 specific pieces of work that we're now leading on and that this committee has responsibility for. The first is the potential future shielding arrangements. The second relates to test and trace and outbreak management. And the third relates to the support package that we are standing up for people that need to self-isolate. So just very briefly on each one of those 3 points. Shielding, as you know, was paused nationally from the 1st of August. That allowed people to revert to some kind of normality, even if they're critically extremely vulnerable. Although I think, as I've reported here a couple of times, we know that around half of the people that we were supporting felt very nervous at the time about going out. And we, just to remind the committee, remain available and are actively supporting a significant number of people still who are still nervous about going back to work or going out and about shopping. But that said, what we believe now the national strategy is based on is trying to avoid at all costs another national shielding programme. There's definitely a move, I think, towards a more localised approach, and we've seen that in some of the policy decisions nationally around local lockdowns, where small geographies, still significant in size, but small geographies are subjected to restrictions. And that allows the rest of the country clearly to continue about their business without fear of economic or social consequences. So I think this kind of concept of local works for us here in Cambridgeshire. It's very much the spirit this committee has driven our work forwards, and it very much feels like that's the way that shielding might go if it were to return. Shielding, if it were to be stood up again, can only be implemented by government. We can request it of the Chief Medical Officer, but it's a ministerial decision. And would only be invoked, I think, if outbreaks within Cambridgeshire were at such a level that those that are clinically extremely vulnerable were subject to significant harm. So I don't believe it will be done lightly. That said, government are clearly nervous, as are we all, about the fact that the pandemic is continuing and that there may well be a second wave. Who knows, but we have to plan on that basis. And so have issued now a framework for local authorities to set up shielding arrangements going forwards. And let's just take you straight to section 2.2.5, if I may, because that's a summary basically of the framework. Sets out what the framework requires of local authorities to ensure that wherever anybody is in the country, if they're subjected to shielding, they will get the same sort of response. And I'm really pleased, and I hope this doesn't sound arrogant, really pleased to be able to say that this very much mirrors the approach that we've been taking in Cambridgeshire throughout the pandemic. We know we were doing way more than many other councils, but we've been involved in some discussions with the ministry about how the new shielding framework might operate. And it appears that they've certainly taken on board some of our experiences and some of our work. So I think for your assurance, if we were to find ourselves in a situation where shielding was reintroduced in Cambridgeshire, we are in a very strong position to pick up where we left off. We haven't gone away, in fact, but we're certainly able to pick up and mobilise the support quite quickly. So in a strong position. The second update relates to test and trace. Obviously, a lot of national reporting around the effectiveness of the NHS test and trace service. Again, very much driven by the chairman, the leader in this committee. There is definitely a real commitment to trying to take as much local control as possible on our work, on our practice, on our policy making. And test and trace is no different. We figure that if we were to have more control over contacting people who have had a positive test result, or indeed trying to trace the people that they've been in touch with at a local level, we'd have probably far more success. And in fact, we've been able to test out that local approach in Peterborough, where we have a local enhanced testing pilot in place. Very small numbers of referrals, only 28 at the point the report was written a few days ago, but close on 90% success rate. And these 28 referrals into Peterborough are all people that the NHS Test and Trace Service have failed to be able to contact. So these aren't just people that that they feel that they ought to be in touch with. These are people that have had a positive test result and have been failed to be contacted by the NHS Test and Trace Service. Those referrals come down to Peterborough after 24 hours of repeated contact, and then as set out in the report, just shy of 90% of those are successfully contacted, often on first attempt. And I think that's because it's a local telephone number in the first instance. It's not a national number. We have made some door knocks to some households that we haven't been able to contact, and we've got local intelligence that we can triangulate to try and reach people that perhaps the national team can't. So with that in mind, we were invited to submit to government some suggestions around how more localised control might work for us here in Cambridgeshire. And at section 232, I've just described briefly there the three asks that we've made of government. First, that we have more control over the entire end-to-end test and trace programme, not just people that have been tested positive, but their contacts as well. We should have more control over contacting those people, as long as it comes with resource. Second, that we have more involvement in local testing arrangements. So this is particularly the case around mobile testing units that are provided where needed, but actually the testing is carried out by people that come with those testing units. And what we've seen in other parts of the county rather is some reluctance from some parts of the community to be tested. They're nervous about, in some cases, leaving their details and so on, nervous about what the test involves. And where we have been able to have community staff on site alongside the NHS test staff, we've been able to allay those fears, and it's led to far more take-up of testing. So more involvement in those arrangements. And then finally, greater influence and control over the lab testing capacity. Again, that's driven either by a national or regional set of contracts, and with very little control over the ability for labs to cope with the volume of testing. And that's becoming more of a challenge. We're seeing testing laboratories reach capacity or becoming close to capacity. So we're suggesting we have some kind of influence over the local commissioning. So that's the ask that we've made, and we await further feedback. But every indication is that there will be a move to more localised arrangements. And the recent announcement from government to create the new Institute of Health Protection, I think, with a greater reliance on local public health services, is an indication of that direction of travel. At 2.4, I've just summarised there just as a final update, the work we're doing on local support arrangements. This remained, I remind you, an outstanding action in the action log. Our support package is very much built on the work we've done through the shielding programme, and what worked and what didn't work for people who were needing to self-isolate over a much longer period during shielding. And at 2.42, you can see the summary diagram there. It combines, our support will combine a combination of information and advice, making sure people know where they can get help, what the rules are, what self-isolation actually means, leading to practical help with food and medicines, or the sorts of chores that involve people needing to go outside of their home but can't. And then where we're currently refining detail at the top of that triangle there, the financial support that might be necessary. And this is particularly the case for people that are on 0 hours contracts, for whom they would not receive a salary if they needed to self-isolate. So we need to manage that process carefully. All of this support is funded through national government grant. We've received a test and trace grant to support, an outbreak management grant rather, to support our work. It's just a matter now of applying the appropriate measures to support people that find themselves needing to self-isolate, either for the 10 days or for the 14 days. And just very finally, at 2.47, as part of that support package, it's really important we work with employers as well. so that employees don't feel that they will be penalised or in other ways disadvantaged if they need to self-isolate. If you're told to self-isolate, it's really important that people do so immediately, obviously. This is about keeping the rest of the population safe. So employers really need to be cooperative and supportive of their staff who find themselves in that situation. And absolutely, during the pandemic, we've seen thousands of examples of good employer practice with people continuing to work from home and so on. But there are some staff that can't work from home in manufacturing, for example, or agriculture. And so we are working closely with certain industry types and in locations where we think there's a higher level of employees, perhaps on 0 hours contracts or who can't work from home, to try and support employers with making the right decisions. And that might include helping with transport, getting employees home when they get a positive test result, getting staff to their place of work safely through other transport options, helping top up statutory sick pay contributions and other practical measures. And as always, I'd really value any feedback on anything more you think we should be doing to support either residents or employers to keep the rest of our population safe. I'll leave it there, Chairman, and happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Adrian, and good to see that we're looking ahead and getting plans in place for whatever may come in the future. So really pleased about that. Thank you very much for your work. So members, we're being asked to comment and in particular endorse the approaches that Adrian's just been outlining. So over to you, Councillor Nieto. Lena.
Thank you, Chair. Adrian, once more kind of leading the way as an authority, and thank you so much for the exemplary work that you and the rest of the officers have been doing, because avoiding and preventing a local pandemic, I think, depends on the work that we do as an authority and as members, and of course we need to make sure that residents also continue following guidance. So it's a responsibility of all of us. But yeah, thank you so much for the work that you have been doing. Just to say that last night I was in a meeting with Matt Hancock, and he recognized the effort that officers and members were doing to bring down the cases in Peterborough. So that's kind of, I know it's not the county, but I think that was a really good point that he made. So, and I know that you have been working very hard on that. As regards to test and trace, I just wanted to know, because I know that most businesses, they are kind of following government guidance and they're compliant with, registering everybody that comes into the premises. But I know that there's still some that are not taking it very seriously. So I'm just wondering if there is an opportunity or if there's an action potentially to engage further with businesses. I mean, not for us to directly do it, but maybe other organizations that are working closely with businesses like the BIDs and others to make sure that they understand and they're compliant with the guidance as per test and trace. Thank you.
Well, of course, some of this is trading standards, Adrian, which is us, isn't it? So we perhaps do have a part to play, but welcome your answers.
Thank you, Chairman. Thanks, Councillor Nieto, very much so. And thanks for the feedback from Matt Hancock. That's good to hear. And Peterborough's position is definitely improving, although it can fluctuate fairly rapidly. And also thanks for your kind words at the start. So absolutely, I think we do have a part to play here in business engagement, and it isn't just about helping employers to support their employees if they need to go home. It is about overall compliance. As you're probably aware, a lot of the outbreaks locally and nationally relate to what are known as community outbreaks, but can be picked up and passed across the workforce fairly quickly. And some examples of where we've been very active include some work with colleagues in Finland, carrying out some asymptomatic testing of a whole workforce in a setting we thought would be at higher risk. It was a little bit of a pilot approach, but we combined professional testing staff with community staff and hub staff to achieve 100% test compliance on the day, and that was a very successful exercise. And that's the sort of thing we can proactively do almost on request where the evidence suggests we need to. We're also, in fact, Thursday today, I think, isn't it? We have a team again in Peterborough, but it's a good example of the sort of work we're doing. Have a team out at 4:30 this morning, meeting the agency buses that are picking up lots of staff, taking them to factories. Actually, in Cambridgeshire, a lot of the agency staff in Peterborough travel to work in largely Fenland and Huntingdonshire. So it's really important that we do keep an eye on what's happening in Peterborough. And so we were out there at 4:30 this morning. When I say we, I wasn't. I have to confess, but the team were, I know, and we're busy engaging with people boarding the buses, giving out face masks, but also making sure the bus was compliant with social distancing. And then I think generally, as the chairman said, there is a role here for both environmental health and trading standards, and it is partly an educational role. So very much building, Councillor Nieto, on your point around engaging with the chambers maybe and the bids across the county. I think that's really, really important. And I think I'd like to take an action away to check how much of that proactive work with those kinds of representative bodies we're doing, because they've got a vital role to promote awareness raising amongst employers. And the flip side of that is around compliance and regulation, which is more associated with the council role that trading standards and particularly environmental health colleagues have. The response, I have to say, and pay credit to the environmental health officers across the county, that function sits within districts, but they have entirely risen to the challenge that they face. It's unprecedented, and coping admirably, I think, with the pressures that they're seeing. And actually, in the most part, are able simply to provide advice, and then compliance is achieved. But there have been some examples where enforcement has had to happen, and we won't shy away from that as a collective set of local authorities. If that becomes necessary for the protection of the public, that's what we will do. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Councillor Taylor, Amanda. Are you there, Amanda?
Right, great. Thank you very much for the report. I have some questions on it, and also, you know, one looking forward to the futures as well. Looking at your test and trace section, where you talk about the difficulties of contacting some people who need to be contacted. I was wondering, firstly, when you mentioned other forms of data to reach people in 2.3.2, I wondered if you could expound on what those forms of data are, whether there's any challenges from data protection, and also whether you consider using local members to help with that contacting of people, because, you know, from local knowledge we may be able to help with that. Seems to be a resource that might be used. And then secondly, a bigger question really. I don't normally read the Daily Mail myself, but I was visiting last week, and I had to see a great big article with a big picture of Shire Hall and other councils, with the Daily Mail condemning us all for not all sending everybody back to work. I wonder if I could ask you, Chair, what your view is on the government drive to get everybody back to their offices. I don't think we should be sending people back until it's safe to do so, and we have got our offices ready. But I think there is a more serious consideration in that we do need to be looking at how our offices are going to be ready and be safe for staff and the public to use again. And I wondered if you could please tell us what preparations the LRF group is making to get our offices ready for people to return, partly for county council staff to be working there and the public visiting, also for council meetings to resume in person. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. Do you know what preparations are?
Yeah, so I'll take the questions in reverse order. The Preparations for staff returning to work. In fact, a number of staff have already returned to their normal place of work, although not huge numbers. And the mechanism, the process that we are following is extremely rigorous. Senior staff within any area of the council that requires or for various reasons requires their staff to return to an office space has to complete a fairly comprehensive submission, almost a business case, which is reviewed by the joint management team, which is Gillian's leadership team of all of the senior directors. And they are assessed individually based on the request that's made. I think, Councillor Taylor, really that's primarily because of the point you make. We've got to make sure that staff returning to work, A, it's essential, and B, that when they do return into an office, that it's entirely safe for them to do so. So where we have made approvals already for staff to return to an office, a full COVID risk assessment is carried out and signed off by both our health and safety team and our public health team. And as I say, that is submitted into JMT. The flip side to staff returning to work because of a work need is staff that need to return to the office, even part-time, from a wellbeing point of view. And that's the other concern here, really, that if we don't get this right, staff that perhaps are already feeling quite isolated or out of touch, despite amazing efforts by managers to keep in touch via Zoom, it's not quite the same, as we know. So the part of the process allows for staff to be granted permission, again in a safe way, to return to the office, even part of the week, in order to make contact with other people. It's important if you're living alone or perhaps you're facing difficulties at home. It's important to have that outlet. So I think we are, I would say this, wouldn't I, but I think we're an exemplar employer in terms of standing up those arrangements and making sure that staff are returning safely. I'll perhaps let, as you suggest, the Chairman to comment on the government policy around return to work. But can I just quickly cover off, Chairman, the first question as well around the role of members and the use of data. I absolutely couldn't agree with you more. We're so blessed actually with the member input during the shielding programme, and some incredible referrals were made. You were leading locally an awful lot of effort and work on the ground or signposting local voluntary groups, parish councils and others to the right sets of resources. And I don't see that needs to change, whether it's to do with shielding, whether it's to do with supporting vulnerable people generally, whether it's to do with contact tracing, outbreak management, whatever it is. I think the vital role of a community leader who is an elected member representing whole communities is really vital here. And the LGA, I recall, at the start of the pandemic, published some guidance on the role of members during the pandemic. It might be interesting for us to circulate that document again, because it did describe exactly, Councillor Taylor, what you're describing, and that's an active role which we've really welcomed here in the county. And in terms of the reason that's important for test and trace specifically, and why data matters, is because sadly there are some people who it's proving difficult to contact, not necessarily because they are avoiding being contacted, although I'm sure some are, because it is very disruptive. There are some examples where we've got incorrect telephone numbers, and actually triangulating data with other data sources that we help hold locally, such as council tax data or benefits data, can just ensure that we get to the right person. There are, in the pandemic scenario, there is a very comprehensive data sharing agreement that exists across the Local Resilience Forum for the purposes of health protection, and it's under that data sharing agreement, that allows us to share data appropriately. It's properly regulated and so on, but we've got full compliance, and our DPO, Data Protection Officer, is policing us very carefully to ensure compliance.
So briefly, Amanda, to answer your question, my personal view is that I welcome the government's message to get back to work where it's safe to do so. Because as we well know and has been mentioned, there are many people that are actually happy working from home, but there are also many people that miss being in their workplace and their interaction with colleagues. So, but as Adrian said, safety is absolutely the vital thing. So it needs to be done on a case-by-case basis rather than a blanket decision. So, so welcome it where it's possible and where people wish to go back to work. But obviously this is a moving picture, and gradually the situation will change, and hopefully gradually over the months ahead, all those that want to go back to work will be able to do so, but safety is paramount. So we've got Councillor Batchelor next. Henry.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I've got 3 questions, so if you don't mind bearing with me. On section 2.2, I was going to ask, we're told that the Hub is developing a comprehensive plan to address all the changes that are being proposed. I was just wondering if it was, when the plan was drawn up, if it was likely we'd get view of that here at the committee, and if so, when that might be. Section 2.3, I was going to ask a question whether, Adrian, you thought it was likely that the government would allow us more localised control over test and trace, given the fact that Cambridgeshire minus Peterborough is doing relatively okay, or if things would have to get as bad as they are in Peterborough for the government to actually say, okay, you know what, you can actually run things yourself locally to give us support. And then finally, 2.4, onto the support packages. I just wanted to make sure that the work here wasn't overlapping with the work that the Think Communities team are doing. So I know we've got a report on that next on the agenda, so I just wanted to make sure work isn't being duplicated. That's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Batchelor. All very clear questions. Thank you. Absolutely, it would be great to bring you the plan that we need to draft. And what I'd like to suggest is that we bring that to the October committee as part of either the Service Director report or the COVID report. Sadly, perhaps didn't make this point actually, the framework that we've been sent is still a draft framework from government. I think they're seeking input on it, but we don't want to wait. As you know, we've tried to be on the front foot throughout our work so far, and we are going to use the draft framework to create our own version of how locally we'll mobilise that work. So with that caveat, officers, the team here will be working on that in the next couple of weeks, and then we'll bring it back to you in October for your comment. And hopefully by then we'll have a final framework that we can also reflect on. But as I've said, it will be similar to what we've been doing anyway. So thank you for that. It's a brave officer that tries to predict what government might do. But I will give you an honest reflection on whether or not I think we'll get more local control. And my sense is we will. I think there is a national almost call really for local is best as far as managing the pandemic is concerned, and we've just proved that over and over again here in Cambridgeshire. You know, I've reported here before some of the frustrations we've had with the National Food Delivery Service, for example, and its inflexibility. It didn't provide really for any what aren't even unusual circumstances, vegetarian food or halal food, for example, and it rarely included anything fresh. And actually, that National Food Service was designed to support the clinically extremely vulnerable people in our county, 32,000 of them. So one of the reasons why we made our own local arrangements was to substitute those deficiencies with a more local positive response. And that's one example of many I could cite. And they've been, believe me, fed back through the civil servants up to government. And so my sense is that we will see more local control. And I don't believe it will rely on an area becoming an area of concern such as Peterborough. I think it's helpful that we've got an area of concern in our county, in our geographical county, because we've been able to test out what local looks like. And I would imagine we'll see much more of that happening across Cambridgeshire. And as we do, I'll be bringing that through to you for comment and review as part of your oversight role. And the final point on 2.4, thank you for highlighting the potential for overlap. I'm really pleased to be able to say that the Think Communities team are firmly embedded in the hub. And in fact, we have Matt and Elaine on the call today, of course, who will also are involved, in fact, in developing the support package. So Matt in particular is leading the work on both the financial hardship element and on the food element, and we'll be making sure that the Think Communities principles are used, so we're not creating dependency, but we are supporting the most vulnerable people. So the two things really go hand in glove.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Adrian. And in many cases, the teams are actually one in the same, aren't they? So yeah, that's good. Thank you. Councillor Scott, Jocelyn.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Adrian, for a very comprehensive report. And I should also take this opportunity to say thank you for the report on the coroner's office as well, because that was equally comprehensive. Now, I've just got 2 points to raise. One is the county able to do anything, and has it given consideration to encouraging people in the community to actually mask and social distance? Because I've noticed that it's extraordinarily variable in Cambridge, and I would anticipate that in the villages it would be variable as well. And people, I think, because it hasn't touched lots of people. I mean, of course it has touched some, and in that regard we're highly sympathetic to the grief and the distress, but I think some people are not really taking it seriously, and particularly as we've had summer days, it's not summer at the moment, it's led people to be out there in the community, and some religiously masking and some not, some accepting the importance of social distancing, some not. So I come back to the question, which is, has the county given consideration to some sort of encouragement in a public way throughout Cambridgeshire and of course Peterborough to encourage people to social distance and mask? So that's number one. And number two is possibly, one might say, better directed to the Children and Young Persons Committee. But since, Adrian, you are the leader in the COVID-19 issue, what sort of support is the county giving to teachers in returning to school? Because it has become clear that children are far more vulnerable than has been acknowledged in the past, and the concerns of teachers, parents, children and their family cohorts, it is an important one. So what support are we giving to teachers and schools in regard to masking, to personal protective gear and so on? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was just writing down the rest of the question. Thank you very much for the comments about the reports, much appreciated. Very helpfully, actually, the leader of the council has also identified a need for the council to be more proactive in promoting the social distancing guidelines, and for the council to be seen and to be a strong local advocate for mask wearing, temperature checking, compliance in shops and open spaces. And we are about to be launching a very robust awareness raising campaign on the back of the Keep Caring message that we have started to use. And I think we've got a vital role to play there. We have some enforcement powers, but they're very limited. In fact, most of the enforcement around things like social distancing rests with the constabulary, and as you know, the constabularies nationally are taking more of an educational and awareness raising approach rather than an enforcement approach, except in extreme circumstances. So I think you're right. Our role has to be to act as good local leaders and to promote. And one of the reasons why, and I don't need to say this to you, but as this is a meeting in public, why I started by saying the pandemic is not over, and I think we've got to keep reminding people of that fact. The other thing I think that is important here, though, is that we do have a collaborative role with our partners to stamp down on mass non-compliance. And perhaps with your permission, Councillor Costello, just talk about some of the issues that you and I and others have been talking about in your division around mass gatherings, organised gatherings held by people that ought to know better, and complete non-compliance. And we've got a really strong format now in the county where we can, through intelligence, pull together what's called a safety advisory group. And that comprises all of the relevant officers specific to an event, but also the constabulary, fire service, health colleagues, frankly, whoever we need to ensure that an event, if it does happen, happens safely. Or in the case of one particular event in Councillor Costello's division, was actually prevented from happening at all. And that would, I'm sure, have led to a significant increase in infection. So there is an awareness raising campaign coming, but we also do have some teeth, and we're not afraid to bite should we need to. Obviously, it's far better that we allow people to go about their business, but they need to go about that business safely. And a similar theme really to support for teachers. I will, with your permission, ask our Director of Education to provide a briefing note rather than me second guessing. But what I do know is that he has been incredibly active throughout the pandemic, twice daily briefings to head teachers, primary, secondary and special schools, nursery schools and so on. He's held a number of face-to-face via Zoom workshops and information sessions. And schools are one of the settings that exist within our outbreak control plan as a setting of concern, meaning that we need to be alert and alive to any increase in infection rates in a school setting, partly because of clearly the children, but also because of the staff and the parents and volunteers and teaching assistants and so on. So there is quite a sharp spotlight on schools as they start to reopen, but I'll ask Jonathan to provide a little bit more granularity if helpful to committee.
If I could just come back and say, Jonathan has been good in advising us, but I was just thinking you're giving the current update. So updates are always important. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Councillor Every, Liz.
Thank you, Chair, and may I add my congratulations too to the team for what they've been doing, and the reports that we've received are really amazing. I, for one, am absolutely delighted that schools have gone back, and working locally with schools, I have been absolutely amazed at the work that they've done to get those youngsters back. So all power to them. Whilst the schools are going back, we now have FE colleges going back. We now have universities going to come back. So obviously we're quite unique in our city in that we have two more large universities. And you talk about your outbreak control plan. I just wondered what, and obviously I suppose it's mostly Cambridge City, but how we're managing the relationship and the liaison and collaboration with the universities, who are as nervous as everybody else to get them back, and haven't been able to see quite the level of, I'm sure it's there, the level of preparation that I've seen from schools in getting people back, particularly as some come from overseas. So I just wondered if you could just update us on your risk assessments for this over the coming months.
Certainly, thank you, Councillor Every. You're absolutely right. I think that the return of university students in the south of the county in particular, although there are also some returning in Peterborough, presents a significant risk, and you'll be pleased to know there is a huge amount of work ongoing to assess that risk and to work with universities. It is, as you say, largely a Cambridge-centric challenge, but actually it's an issue that we believe as a county, and certainly as with our district council partners, is ripe for mutual aid to be provided to Cambridge, because it's such a big issue, such a large student population. They really can't be expected to manage the consequences of that on their own. And if we get it wrong in Cambridge, the rest of the county suffers anyway, either economically, socially, or indeed medically through the infection. So our environmental health colleagues in Cambridge City Council are leading work, but we are overseeing that work through the Health Protection Board, which is the board that has oversight of our outbreak control plan. And in fact, as I speak now, it's meeting. And one of the main items on its agenda today is the delivery plan against the university COVID risk assessments. And the Anglia Ruskin University students return from this week. So that has been the priority. And I have to say, ARU have been nothing but cooperative and very positive. and they've put COVID secure arrangements in place. They're keeping as many students as possible away, and are providing support for anybody that needs to self-isolate. And then, of course, with the university such as Cambridge, there are dozens of colleges that each require their own response, often in very old buildings, which adds to the complexity. And every one of those colleges is being engaged with. We've got slightly longer, although not much longer. It's sort of early October, realistically, before we start to see significant numbers of students returning. But every one of those colleges will also have a COVID secure risk assessment that's been co-produced with our environmental health colleagues and endorsed by public health, with a view then to keeping students safe, teaching staff safe, but the wider community safe. There are traditionally, as you know, freshers weeks, things like that, events and so on. And you know, with the best will in the world, we can do with our colleges and universities as much as we can. But the moment a student leaves their halls or their lectures, or even you know, wherever they're living, it's harder to control some behaviours. So alongside this will come a significant amount of awareness raising amongst the student population to remember that whilst they might be in a bubble in the university, that bubble needs to continue when they're out in the streets, in bars or clubs or socialising. So a massive amount of work going on. Again, I can make sure, if this can be captured, that I'll include a more substantive update in the October COVID report, just to give you further reassurance.
Yeah, thank you very much. Really reassured. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Councillor French, Jan.
Thank you. Yeah, you said you're a member of SAG, Adrian. Are you aware that there is an event planned for this, not this weekend, next weekend, a 2-day racing scooter? Now, FDC have refused the TENS license for music and alcohol, but I'm concerned because there's going to be over 500 participants, plus the road network where it's going to be held can't take it. Are you aware of that?
So I believe it's on the SAG's agenda, as in that they are aware. What I couldn't confidently update you on is where the discussions are up to. What I'll do though, Councillor French, is make sure I pick this up directly with you outside of the meeting. I'll perhaps ask Rob Hill, who's our representative on the SAG, to liaise with you direct and to provide whatever support is necessary. It does sound like one that we do need to have real tight oversight and control over.
Yeah, we don't want to be a killjoy, but you know,
No,
500 people plus, you know, and the complaints are coming in because it's been advertised for some time now. Okay, thanks, Adrian.
Thanks very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Adrian. Thanks very much for a very comprehensive report and answering all those questions. So I have no further questions, members. So we do have some recommendations to note the overall progress made to date in responding to the impact of the coronavirus. Note, comment on and endorse the approach set out in section 2.2 of the report relating to future shielding arrangements. Note, comment on and endorse the approach set out in section 2.3 of the report relating to the test and trace programme. And note, comment on and endorse the approach set out in 2.4 of the report relating to local support arrangements for people needing to self-isolate. So I'm hoping to take those on block, members. If you could indicate if there's any objections to those recommendations. I see no one indicating, so thank you very much. We'll take those as approved. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. So we, it's still you, Adrian. Item 6, report of the Service Director for Communities and Partnerships. So it's your monthly report, Adrian. Thank you. We're working you very hard, I know.
No, that's fine. I'm so sorry though. Me droning on again. I'll keep it brief. But actually, I was just reflecting actually before today on how much this committee has achieved since it's still, you know, in its relative infancy really. And if you think about some of the big ticket items that we've progressed, we've got a new libraries vision, which I think will be world beating. Certainly will be nationally renowned. Our skills service looks completely different now and is entirely well positioned to support economic recovery and the national vision for jobs. We've got a much sharper focus, a much more responsive service around domestic abuse and sexual violence. We've got more hate crime reporting centres, a real sharp focus on addressing poverty and social immobility, and a clear role now for the County Council to support districts on housing and homelessness. And I think probably the biggest achievement is in relation to Think Communities, which I'm not ashamed to say forms a major part again of the Service Director report this month. I think what the committee has had here is real vision and foresight and confidence in trusting an approach which is really hard to evidence. And it's been the privilege of my life to be able to mobilise that approach during the pandemic. And we've now got 6 months worth of Think Communities type delivery under our belts, which I don't want to lose, and I'm sure committee don't want to lose, which is why I'm focusing so much on it in our business as usual report today. I'm particularly keen to maintain, yes, but build upon even more the momentum that we've generated over the last 6 months, and building on the previous year or 18 months worth of work of this committee. And that's why on page 21 of the report, that circles diagram shows you an initial group of high priority issues that through discussion here at this committee, with other committees and with other directors, we believe Think Communities needs to be turning its attention to, because these are the things that are affecting people's lives in our county. They are costing the council and our partners the most money, and actually are achieving, in some cases, poorer outcomes for our citizens. So those 8 priorities, an initial 8 priorities, I should say, are those priorities that we believe Think Communities should be bent towards, very much building on the spirit of the pandemic work we've done, but moving into mainstream delivery. And the bulk of the report sets out what each of those 8 priorities actually means. And in the appendix at the back of the report, there's a sheet per priority which describes or answers the what question, really. Why are we doing this? What will it look like? How will we do it? What will we achieve? And what are our motivations? And which aren't always financial motivations. There are some significant inequalities we know in our county that we need to address, and we hope these 8 priorities will do that. So that would welcome some feedback on. The other issue that we've been grappling with at committee now for some time is the issue of boundaries and geographies, and we've looked at in various ways and in various formats at how we can corral our public sector colleagues and ourselves into geographical place-based focused delivery teams. And we've gone into this in a lot of detail, as you know. We've had a number of workshops on it, a number of committee reports. And I'm hoping that the diagram at the top of page 22 actually provides a much more pragmatic approach to a geographical definition of place, which at the end of the day, if we're going to organise public services around our communities, it's the communities themselves that ought to decide what shape that community is. It's not really for us to determine what constitutes a community. And I think what we're trying to show there in the diagram on the left-hand side is that it doesn't really matter what shape or size a community is. We can bend Think Communities' response towards the need of that specific community. So in some cases, the work will need to be street level. There might be some specific issues associated with social unrest or with real economic hardship that need to be very specific to a street or a group of streets. It might be that we want to take a ward or division approach because it makes sense to do so, to work with single members. It might be we want to take a district or city council wide approach, or indeed a whole county approach. But actually there's quite a big gap between street level and ward or division. And so we are still proposing to introduce another layer of informal geographies with the sole purpose really of bringing together groups of public servants to focus on a specific geography of around about 20, 25, 30,000 residents, when it's appropriate to do so, where there can be a shared plan of action, a shared set of priorities, shared decision making, but in a geographical size which isn't too large and isn't too small to make a lasting difference. And with that combination of geographies, so that would sit as one part of a much broader mix, we hope we will be able to sort of move away from having to lock down a tight definition of a geographical boundary for the purposes of think communities. And in the second appendix in the report, what we've proposed there are groups of parishes that would cluster together to form one of these 28 service delivery areas that are set out in that diagram. Obviously, notable by its absence is Cambridge City, which doesn't have any parishes, but we will be and are working with Cambridge City on defining similar geographical footprints so that the work that happens in the rest of the county through think communities can also be replicated in Cambridge City. But the appendix that you've got there, Appendix 2, is very much the parish clusters. And we're very grateful for some feedback we've already had from some members about how those clusters are shaping up. What we're seeking today is an agreement to, for any feedback, certainly during the meeting, and for any other feedback that I receive, for then the delegation to come to me to make a final list in consultation with the chairman, so that we can share those service delivery areas with our partners and with our parish council colleagues at the parish conference in October. Just moving on to parishes, section 2.3, I just wanted to quickly update you on the work we're doing with the Local Council Strategic Partnership. So this is the partnership of the County Council, the Cambridgeshire and Peterborough Association of Local Councils, and Cambridgeshire Acre. We are meeting on a very frequent basis. I think a very strong relationship, and we've all seen, I think, the amazing response from parish and town councils during the pandemic, often without the need for any support, and certainly in most cases not needing to be asked. They've simply stepped up, and we really want to support that work and mainstream and support, continue to support that work going forwards without interference. The last thing we want to do is to get in the way. That isn't our role. We want to enable it to happen. So very much Capalc and Acre are keeping us to account and on our toes, and we welcome that. It's a very positive relationship. I just wanted to shamelessly plug the parish conference, Local Councils Conference, which is a fully digital event this year, taking place on the 23rd of October. The chairman and I were fortunate enough to see an example of how that's going to feel and look. The technology is amazing. It very much feels like you're there at a venue, or at least it did to me. Maybe I'm just a bit of a Luddite, but it certainly felt good. And actually, I really would urge you all to join. We will be able to share the event for 30 days afterwards as well. But it's going to be, I think, an amazing experience. We can have an almost limitless number of attendees. So whole parish councils can attend. Normally these things are limited to 1 or 2 people. So please hold that date in your calendars, 23rd of October. It should be a good session. We're doing some other work as well with the Local Council Strategic Partnership, including how we can, as I've said, support parish councils to mainstream their approach to supporting emergency situations. And Capalc and Acre are working with some parish councils that have expressed an interest in developing an emergency plan approach, so that in the event of anything like this ever happening again, we're not out of this yet, of course, they can stand up arrangements in the same way that they've done this time, learning from the experience. And then also some work with parishes on what's known as the green recovery, so how we can use our open spaces more effectively to get people out and about, back into mainstream life, supporting the health and well-being agenda, especially people that may not want to return to indoor gyms or other indoor facilities at the moment. So some great work going on there. And then finally at 2.4, very briefly, just a quick update on the improving social mobility work. We, as the report said, have met again with the cross-party working group, which I thought was a fantastic meeting. Really helpful dialogue was held. Lots of input from members from across the political spectrum. And we've now got a lot of work to do, which we are developing. Matt and Elaine particularly brunting that work and doing a great job. We've almost got too many actions in the plan, and that's a strange thing to say, but actually we need to do what we do really well and know that it's making a difference, rather than just include a list of actions that we're doing anyway. So between now and the next meeting of the Social Mobility Working Group, we will be refining that plan, making sure that we have decent baseline information. What I don't want to be doing is saying to you in a year's time, as a result of this work, I'm afraid these areas of the county are still socially immobile. We want to be saying to you, we're starting to see green shoots of change. And the only way we can do that is if we have actions which stretch us. So, I'm really grateful. Thank you, members, to you for those of you that are on that group. The 4 themes remain in development. That's the impact of COVID on certain groups, BAME, older people and so on, and how that impacts on their social mobility. A theme around food security, which we've expanded to include fuel security, fuel poverty. A third priority around community engagement and how we can work with communities to support themselves and each other to become more socially mobile. And then a 4th theme around social mobility, specifically in relation to older people and people with learning disabilities and other forms of disability. So we will be bringing you a very comprehensive report on the work of that social mobility group, probably in a couple of months' time, but some great progress being made, for which, as I say, I'm very grateful. Thank you. Having promised I wouldn't ramble on, apologies, that probably was a bit of a ramble.
Thank you, Adrian. That's great. Thank you. And just for members, if I can add the 8 priorities under 2.2.3, a lot of good work obviously has been going on, but that's where we think communities can really help with our partners to get better outcomes on those priorities. And also to say, of course, that's from the People and Communities Directorate. Other directorships will be adding their own priorities to sort of build the bigger picture around Think Communities, because of course this is across the whole council, this and with partners, this approach. So any questions for Adrian, members? Okay, thank you, Adrian. Nobody indicating, so we'll move to the recommendations, please, members. To note and comment on the progress made to date in relation to the various work streams described in the report. Endorse the expansion of the food poverty outcome for the Think Communities unified approach to include fuel poverty, and comment on the proposed service delivery areas for Think Communities unified approach, and to delegate the development and approval of the final working set to the Service Director for Communities and Partnerships in consultation with the Chairman of the Communities and Partnerships Committee. And it's just reminded me to add, of course, at the Parish Council's conference, if parishes wish to have an input, these aren't set in stone, and could change in the future. So they need to work locally. So members, if you're happy to take those recommendations on block, please indicate if there's any dissent. Otherwise, I'll assume we're all happy. Nobody indicating, so thank you very much. We'll say that those recommendations have been approved and move on to item 7, which is the Voluntary and Community Sector Infrastructure Support Agreement. And we have Elaine Matthews and Helen Andrews to present.
Yes, good morning.
Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, everybody. So I'd like to present the paper for committee to consider the planned recommissioning and procurement of voluntary and community sector infrastructure support services across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough. Okay, so it's really important for us to remember that the investment that our council makes to support the voluntary and community sector, including through the infrastructure support agreement, sends a really strong signal to that sector, to the voluntary and community groups, about the value and the contribution that they make to our communities, as well as about informing, influencing and inspiring future practice and policy. So infrastructure support focuses on helping those voluntary and community groups to start up, to thrive and to be sustainable. It provides them with the information advice, with training, with networking, events and support with volunteers and social action. It advises them on management of community facilities and how to develop within their community. So the voluntary and community infrastructure support services are currently being delivered to frontline organisations in Cambridgeshire by Support Cambridgeshire. And that's made up of Hunts Forum, Cambridge CVS and Cambridgeshire Acre. In Peterborough, that same service is delivered by Peterborough CVS, and they are currently separate grant agreements. So in October 2019, this committee approved the proposed approach to tender for sector infrastructure support services jointly with Peterborough City Council. In July 2020, this committee endorsed an extension to the current grant agreement with Support Cambridgeshire to take us up to the 30th of September 2021, which will allow officers to restart the tender process following a pause whilst our focus was necessarily diverted to the COVID response, with business continuing and recovery planning and for adherence to our procurement regulations. Joint commissioning of this service, in keeping with the Think Communities Unified approach, as mentioned by Adrian, will allow funding from County Council and Peterborough City Council to be combined into one tender process with 2 lots. These contracts will share a common specification, but be specific to geographical areas for delivery. So previous reports to this committee suggested a geographical split might be across the north and the south of the county. As a result of the feedback that we got from potential suppliers during soft market testing, as well as from the voluntary and community groups themselves, those lots will now be considered as Lot 1 for the provision of services across Cambridgeshire and Lot 2 for the provision of services across Peterborough. Papers to this committee in October 2019 and July 2020 also suggested the possibility of a 3rd lot, which was around focusing on supporting the work of the clinical commissioning group. That shared approach has now been picked up appropriately outside of this contract and as part of an early intervention and prevention framework procurement. In order to develop the specification of requirement for this new service, we've carried out significant engagement with stakeholders, with current and potential providers, with county council service leads and others. We did this with the voluntary and community group and potential providers through the use of surveys. We used both the State of the Sector survey, but also our own survey of local voluntary and community groups who will be using this service. And we've actively engaged with a wide range of potential providers so that we're listening to their experience of providing such a service and not just listening to the same groups that we've always engaged with. We've taken into consideration the Public Service Board grand challenges, so giving people a good start, ensuring people have good work, creating a place where people want to live and ensuring that people are healthy throughout their lives, which are all contributing to the development of intended outcomes and the service specification. The response of the voluntary and community sector and the infrastructure support organisations during the pandemic has further shaped our collective thinking for future commissioning of this service. We've been listening to the mutual aid groups and revisiting our conversation with local groups so that we have a much more rounded perspective and so that it continues to significantly contribute to the recovery phase, building further resilience within our communities and therefore cost avoidance in the future by supporting residents who don't have local support networks in place to meet their basic needs and supporting the economic recovery with VCS support to give people the opportunities to get them work ready or give them opportunities for better work. The learning from the response to the pandemic has also shown the difference our local parish and town councils play in supporting their communities and coordinating positive action. And we will be continuing the development of a broader and more significant role for this first tier of local government through our direct relationships with them, as mentioned by Adrian. This procurement for the specification for the tender will take an outcomes-based commissioning approach, and the draft specification focuses on 4 broad outcomes. The voluntary and community groups themselves have provided a very strong steer on the value of those and the type of support they will need from providers in order to deliver those outcomes. So in this case, support was defined as being in the form of training, information, advice, conferences, networking, brokerage or representation. This outcome-based approach will provide the council and the providers and those who are supported through the service with the flexibility and ability to prioritise their delivery to maximise impact in their area, including, for example, on the Think Communities areas of focus. So if you look at the paper there, section 2.6 lists the outcomes that we are proposing in our draft specification. So outcome 1, for example, is to have sustainable, well-run voluntary and community sector organisations. When asked, in order to deliver this, the voluntary and community groups say their high priority need for support is around support with ensuring that they have good governance, strong financial management, business planning, etc. That they have support with having robust safeguarding policy and practices, that the support gives them well-managed community assets, including community village halls, so that they can have good volunteer management with effective policies and practice, which help good levels of recruitment and retention, and so that they can be supported with being representative of the diversity in their local population. The second outcome is to have effective collaborative partnership and networks which work together across sectors, using the strength and asset-based approaches and fostering a unified approach to shared priorities. In order to deliver this, the voluntary and community groups say their high priority for need for support is about peer learning, sharing knowledge and practice through that peer learning, working with other similar organisations in a place-based way, about connecting local people networks and support to allow them to come together on specific topics at networking events and working together on joint funding applications. Third outcome is to have new and established groups and projects which support both the local community and Commissioners' priorities. Again, feedback from the voluntary and community groups say that their high priority need for support is with supporting the creation, development and continuation of community groups that meet those priorities and of their local delivery area. It's about support to develop a shared understanding of health, social care, other local principles, and support to enable activities which give people opportunities to get them work ready. I won't go through the full list, it's in your paper, but this is the feedback that we've taken from that grassroots level, from those who will be needing the support provided through our infrastructure agreement. The fourth outcome there is to have strong, vibrant communities with good community spirit. Again, the VCS are saying they'd like support with building the capacity and resilience so that people can help themselves and each other, and fostering and harnessing that community energy and spirit that we have been seeing through the pandemic. The detailed specification is yet to be finalised, and we will be seeking members' opinion on the draft in the next couple of weeks. The final specification will inform the potential providers of the Think Communities priorities area, as just mentioned now by Adrian in his report. In particular, areas where a sustainable and well-run voluntary organisation with strong enabling support in place can make an impact with our residents and in the community. So for example, as part of the COVID-19 outbreak control, local support for carers, budgeting for older people, increasing awareness of available technology to maintain independent living, creating volunteer opportunities for young people not in education, employment or training, and supporting residents with food and fuel poverty, as well as helping us to understand or better understand both the unique needs of our communities, but also the potential for local delivery of key services through place-based commissioning. So I'm now going to pass you over to Helen Andrews, who will set out the procurement timescales and requirements for us.
Thank you, Elaine. Cambridgeshire County Council's total annual investment available for this service is £128,000 per year. The duration of this contract will be for 5 years. This means the County Council's total financial contribution to the contract is £640,000 over the life of the contract. This is in excess of £500,000, and therefore the procurement process requires committee approval to commence the tender process. If approved, the tender documents will be published and will go live on the 5th of January 21. And there's a deadline for tender bids to be submitted back to us by the 5th of February 2021. But before publishing the tender, we have necessary legal and procurement activities, preparing and finalising the tender documents. This includes finalising the service specification by the end of September this year. Other headline procurement dates include between February 21 and the end of April, there'll be a period of evaluation. This includes interviews with prospective contractors before recommendations for final approval to award being made at the end of April. It's proposed a further report will then come to committee in May 21, in your May 21 meeting. Elaine.
Yeah, thank you, Helen. If you don't mind, Chair, it might assist committee if I just add a little bit of clarity to the recommendations.
That's fine.
Thank you. So recommendation A, agree the commencement of the tender process for voluntary and community sector infrastructure support services across Cambridgeshire. That's as per section 2.10. For recommendation B, Helen's just mentioned the agreement to receive a further report in May 2021 following the procurement process, but prior to the contract being awarded. Just to clarify, that report is to provide feedback on what we've learned from the engagement with bidders, but it's not to make a decision about the award. That process is part of the formal procurement exercise. And finally, I would just like to say that the chairman has quite rightly insisted that this committee has the opportunity to feed into the final specification prior to it being published, to make sure that the new contract does meet the expectations and requirements of the committee. Members will therefore be invited to a workshop, which we hope to hold on the 29th of September, I think at 2 o'clock, where they'll be invited to give their opinion on the final specification. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Elaine. So members, we're approving the starting gun, if you like, for the tender process, which then will go through its procedure. But as Elaine said, we can have a chance to discuss the detail and follow the process through, and then see it in May before it's approved. So, so questions, members. Councillor Smith, Mandy.
Thank you. Basically, all very good, very welcomed and everything. But 1.3, the newly commissioned service will work closely with Capalk and Acre, all very good. But not all parish councils are a member of either organisation. What happens to those?
Well, at the moment, sorry, I'm jumping in. I hope that answers. Sorry,
yeah, please do, Elaine. That's fine.
At the moment, ACRE work with all of our local councils, regardless of whether they're a member or not. And Capalk have started working, certainly during COVID, have been advising and working with all parishes as well, regardless of being a member. I think the important thing here is that we are aligning support to those groups who want it. Certainly, we wouldn't be ruling out any local council who wants to be part of the training and development that we offer through this contract. And already we work with a lot of groups who do that.
Right, it's just that I don't want sort of some who are not joined up to these organisations to miss out, that's all.
It's a good point, Mandy. I will also say, I don't think I'm speaking out of turn to say that Capalk are actually transforming their organisation. So I'm sure we'll hear more of those because they intend to offer a lot more to parish councils. So I would hope in future that membership does increase. But yes, you're right. We need to make sure we include everybody. Councillor Scott, Jocelyn.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for, again, a comprehensive coverage of this from both speakers. I want to say I do think it's really important, and I'm very pleased to hear that there will be a workshop before the tender document is completed, because it seems to me it's absolutely vital that the whatever's in the tender is at least to some extent a result of input from councillors. But the question that I actually wanted to ask was, what then would, I understood you to say that in May then next year, before the tender is granted, that this committee would have a chance to have some involvement. Now, of course, I understand the tender process, but what would that meeting of the May, what would it be intended to be held for, and what power, if any, would it have, and what would be the consequence of that meeting? And then I would like to have a follow-up once having had the response to that. Thank you.
That's fine, Jocelyn. Elaine?
Okay, yeah, so the workshop on the 29th of September is to allow members the chance to give their opinion on the final specification, and that would be really useful for us. The paper that will come back in May to this committee is to provide feedback on what we've learned through our engagement with the bidders during the tender process. So committee aren't able to make a decision about the award because that process is part of the form of procurement, but certainly we'll be wanting committee to understand our future relationship and how we can work with the successful providers of the new contract, and actually learn from us any conversations that have happened with all suppliers as to ways that we might want to focus things slightly differently perhaps in the future with our communities.
Thank you, Elaine. So by then, Elaine, all the bidders will have fed back how they intend to deliver these outcomes that we've asked for, and we will then have a chance to see how that delivery looks.
Yes.
Yeah.
And just to follow up, I'd just like to say that when I was on the Health Committee in the last iteration of the council, that is between 2013 and 2017, there was a tender process where several members of the Health Committee, Killian, I've forgotten his family name now, the chair of the Health Committee was a member of this, I was a member, and there must have been somebody from the Conservative group. And we were actually part of the tender process, and that was allowed in that occasion. We were all, of course, sworn to secrecy and confidentiality, but I'm just wondering whether that approach could be taken in relation to this, because I do know that there are a lot of concerns about this area and about the tendering and the results of tendering. Thank you.
Helen, is that something you'd be able to answer for us?
Yes, hi, thank you for that question. It's an interesting one. Our procurement regulations are quite robust and quite strict. In terms of involvement, there is a degree of technical and requirement and skills around the whole evaluation. Procurement actually, in speaking to procurement, they took it out of the regulations in terms of involving members directly because of the risk of challenge and having to go to court to defend your scoring, your comments on an evaluation process. And they felt it was quite high risky. So it's not actually part of our contract regulations per se to have members involved. But obviously you can be involved earlier to give your political opinion. That would very much be valued. But just to say, the evaluation process is very rigorous and very thorough, and is overseen objectively by the procurement body, which in this case is Serco.
Thank you, Helen. So members can have sight of those bids to give political feedback, as you've said. Perhaps I could ask you just to go away and see if lead members could be part of an advisory element to that decision-making process. I understand you're saying they couldn't actually be decision makers, but if they're able to sit in and give comment, it may also help that process and give members a bit of confidence. Could I ask you to sort of take that away? And
I can certainly take that. Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Would that help, Jocelyn?
Yes, thanks very much, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you. So one more question, Councillor Batchelor. Henry.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. So my question was the same as Jocelyn, so I think it's been answered. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions, members, at all? Can't see anybody indicating, in which case, thank you very much, Elaine and Helen. We'll move to the recommendations. So it's to agree the commencement of the tender process for voluntary and community sector infrastructure support services across Cambridgeshire, and to agree to receive a further report in May 2021 following the procurement process, but prior to the contract being awarded. And of course, we've got that workshop at the end of the month. So members happy with those recommendations? Please show if not. Nobody indicating, so I'll take those recommendations as approved. Thank you very much. Thank you, Elaine. Thank you, Helen. And we move on to item 8. Thank you very much, everybody, which is the Communities Capital Fund endorsement of recommendations. Welcome, Ian Phillips.
Thank you, Chairman, and hello again, everybody else. Really pleased to be presenting the final 6 projects to you today for approval. The first one is Great Shelford Parish Council, and 109,000 recommended for that project. It's a good project that the local community actually has come together, developed its own charity, and done a huge amount of work to look to develop the play equipment within the recreation ground, particularly, which has been felt locally as being very substandard and not meeting the needs of toddlers, teenagers, and older people. So the charity has developed a master plan for the area, really, which will totally transform the recreation area, and has already raised 78,000 itself towards the project costs. Our second project is being led by Fenland District Council at £240,000, and it's to invest in Wisbeach Park. For quite some years now, there's been a disused changing rooms which is sat empty, and this project will look to renovate that, expand it, and reopen it for community use. The new pavilion will be a hub for lots of different community activities, particularly the arts, and it will introduce a pop-up cafe and a meeting place, as well as changing rooms for sports and toilet provision. So it will really open up usage of the park and increase activities at which people can take part in. And I know match funding of 20,000 is being provided by the town and the district councils. Next project is over at Kimbolton, being led by the parish council for 23,591, and this is about constructing a pedestrian crossing across the main road through the village. Currently, there's a lot of people feel that they are unable to connect to some of the services, particularly for elderly people or people with disabilities within the village, because the road dissects through. So things like the doctor surgery, supermarkets, bus services, etc. Currently, the road's felt to be unsafe, and it prevents a bit of a barrier, really, to people accessing services. So with the introduction of a new crossing, this will make people be able to use those facilities much more easily, and 24,000 match funding is available from a combination of the parish and the district council at Huntingdonshire. Next, we've got 2 projects, 2 separate projects in Godmanchester. The first being led by the town council at 190,000. And this is investing into the plant nursery, which was recently transferred from Huntingdonshire District Council to the Town Council earlier this year. Very popular community asset within the town, holds lots of social events, provides a lot of volunteering opportunities, really helps people with their mental and physical health. And the town council are very keen to invest into the site, improve the greenhouses and the polytunnels, but also provide a mobile classroom for people to come together, have community meetings and work on the site. So match funding of 100,000 is available from the town council to support that project. Our second God Manchester project is on the opposite side of the town and is being led by the Sports Football Association Trust at 220,000. This project's in two halves really. The first is looking to upgrade the sports facility, the clubhouse, which is really well used by the community. It's on the edge of the town next to a large new housing development, which doesn't have any other community facilities at all. So actually really in need of a venue where people can come together and have different community and social activities take place. As well as that, it's also used by 16 different sports teams within the town. And this clubhouse is used and needed to be upgraded and refurbished. So not only can it meet existing demand, but it can also continue to meet the demand of growth that's going to be coming from that part of town over the next few years. Second part of the project is upgrading the access road. So currently this is a former farm entrance and a very narrow road, which isn't really suitable and doesn't provide good access for people coming and going, whether it be for sports basis or any other use. An investment into that road will allow the trust to bid for a 3G pitch from the Football Association, which have already indicated they're quite supportive of the idea. That's valued at £600,000 if they're successful in that. So that will unlock quite a significant improvement on the sporting side as well as on the social and community side with the clubhouse. Final project to recommend today is at Burwell through the parish council there, and 131,125 is requested. And this is a project that's going to be used to upgrade and refurbish the Gardner Memorial Hall, which is very much unchanged since the 1960s. And as the village has grown and developed, the hall just isn't really up to scratch and isn't able to meet the demands of modern communities and their needs. So particularly around technology and around environmental aspects and around access issues. So I know that the parish council has been working quite strongly on this and has produced a really robust business plan. Has already put, I think, 50,000 match funding towards the design and architecture fees to get to this stage. So that's the end of our recommended projects through this funding process. And I think, as I've reported previously, that this fund has been very popular. We've had 63 applications requesting just over 9.7 million in funding, and throughout the summer projects have been approved. 35 projects, including the ones that I've mentioned today, assuming you're willing to approve those, and that fully commits £5 million from our £5 million budget, and therefore this will be the end of the recommended approvals coming forward. You can see in paragraph 2.9 in the report there I've set out an overview of the different projects that this committee has approved, and you can see quite a broad range across the right across the county, investing into things like play equipment, into men's sheds, upgrading village halls, as I was mentioning earlier, but also completely new builds for community hubs where lots of different services and activities can take place, where communities have very little facility within their space where they can come together. We've seen improvements to parks and recreation grounds, arts facilities, sporting hubs, youth facilities, and a marketplace over at Wisbeach. However, of course, with any funding programme, there's always going to be applications that don't quite meet the threshold, even though they might be quite strong projects in their own right. They haven't always been quite tailored to what this funding bid is looking to achieve, and we've had 28 projects which we weren't able to fund. And I've just put down there some of the sort of overall areas why some of the projects didn't quite work. So sometimes we've had sporting projects which were just perhaps just a cricket project or just a football project that were looking for investment into their club, but didn't really show how the wider community impact or engagement outside of that offer would be met. Some of the other reasons why projects haven't been successful is because of lack of match funding, or just perhaps just an occasional use project. And we've had a couple of splash park projects come through which would have been used perhaps just for 2 or 3 months of the year, and members felt that perhaps wasn't the best value to use for county funding to support those projects. And some of the projects were very good ideas and quite worthy, but still in the very early stages of development, perhaps hadn't really engaged with some of the stakeholders or undertaken community consultation, and were just too early to be really considered compared to some of the other projects which are quite well established and will get going quite quickly. So that really brings the end to the process today. What I would perhaps suggest, if the committee would be interested, is perhaps I come back perhaps maybe February, March time to give an update of how projects have developed today, and where funding has been used and some of the impact that it's had. If that's useful, I'd be happy to come back and do that perhaps, as I say, in a few months' time. I'm very happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for the report. And yes, please, I think we would like feedback, because we need to see where our money has been spent. So that's quite right and proper. We would. So this is the final recommendations, as Ian has said, members. And of course, it has been before the cross-party scoring panel, as you all know. Jan, you've been indicating, would you?
Yes, I would like to declare an interest in 2.3 Fenland Council with regard to the 240,000.
Okay, thank you. So you're abstaining on that item, are you, Jan? Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Ashwood, Barbara?
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to say to Ian, I'd love to get more news early next year on how some of these projects have gone. I feel it's been a real privilege to be on the panel occasionally. Ian has handled it all brilliantly. And it is that wonderful feeling for a change of being able to give something back instead of constantly take. So yes, please, can we follow up on it? And can everyone dig into their trouser turn-ups, under the chair cushions, whatever, to see if we can get some more money for next year, because it's obviously needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for that positive feedback. And yes, I'll echo those thanks to you, Ian, for all the work you've done with this process. So any other comments, members, before we move to the recommendations? With Jan's abstaining on the Wisbeach element, I'm assuming you're happy for me to take them all on block, members. So the recommendations are to approve the following applications: Great Shelford, 109,000 for Playscape project; Fenland District Council, 240,000 for Wisbeach Park Pavilion; Kimbolton Parish Council, £23,591 for the Humpback Crossing; Godmanchester Town Council, 190,000 for the Community Plant Nursery; Godmanchester Sports Football Association Trust, 220,000 for improvements to the clubhouse and road; and Burwell Parish Council, £131,125 for refurbishment of the Gardner Memorial Hall. All hopefully going to have a good impact on their communities. So can we take those on block, members? Please indicate if anybody has any objection to those recommendations. Nobody showing, so we'll take those as approved. Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody, and thank you again, Ian. So, members, we move on to item 9, which is Community Champions Oral Updates. You are all, of course, asked to present them in written form so they can be appended to the minutes, and I know Councillor Machini has done so. Community Champions, anything you wish to report verbally to the committee, please indicate.
Yes, can I just a couple of things I'd like to mention.
Yeah, sure.
First of all, I just thought that those of you who are on the Improving Social Mobility Working Party would be interested to know that I'm attending a Zoom meeting next week with the Speak Out Council, who work with adults with learning difficulties. And they'd recently undertaken a survey with their members on communication opportunities So that should be quite interesting, and I look forward to feeding that back to the working party. The other thing I just wanted to mention was that I'm quite concerned about the future this winter for young people, children, a bit, not so much about food poverty, but fuel poverty may mean that they're living in cold homes. So what we're planning to do is to extend the items that we have in the Essentials by Sue with what I call winter warmers, gloves, scarves, hats, and what have you. And I've made contact with the WI, who are very keen to produce these items. And so we will be advertising it as part of the Essentials by Sue for young people to come to, young mothers and children, if they need a scarf or a hat during the winter. That's it.
Thank you, Adela. So broadening out the remit of Essentials by Sue sounds like a pretty creative idea. Yeah, well done. Good.
Thank you.
Thanks, Adela. Councillor Every, Liz?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that since COVID has happened, the nature of the work that I've been doing has changed quite a lot. And I suppose the involvement I've had more over the last 2-3 months is the realignment strategically of the various bodies that are involved with COVID. We've realigned the Community Safety Partnership to move more towards place-based approach. So I think there's been a lot of work. A lot of stakeholders are now working together that wouldn't have done before in order to have some kind of synergy across the post-COVID programme and to pick the best out of what's happened and obviously try to mitigate the worst things that have happened. And I just wonder that it's been quite a positive approach. And the driver of all this through the middle is Think Communities. And I think it's really important. From East Cambs, I have to say that this has been a very interesting time to work with, because I think we've got a project in Littleport, Think Communities, which is going to be really very effective, and they were well down the line, which we're going to replicate anyway. So I think there's been a lot of coming together across the district that we might not have had. So that's been really interesting. And I'd like to thank actually not only our East Cambs supporters, but also the way that East Cambs and Cambridgeshire have worked so closely together to create something which is really quite well, really fascinating. I'm just going to watch over the next 12 months how it goes.
Thank you, Liz. Yes, it's very gratifying to see. And as Adrian mentioned earlier, we mustn't lose this because we're working closer with partners than ever before. So that's really important, a really positive thing. Thank you. Jan.
Thank you, Chris. Yeah, just to let you know, a few weeks ago, I think it was the 11th of August, I was very fortunate. I had spoken to a business in March about laptops for Octavia Alternative Provision. Obviously, the money doesn't come from county, and they were struggling. They only have 35 students, but they had no laptops. So I put an appeal out, and I was very fortunate that a local businessman bought and paid 8 laptops, and we delivered them to the school a few weeks ago. So obviously they were very grateful for that. So that's just an update.
Thank you very much, Jan. Excellent. Any questions for our community champions members? Of course, it's always good to be in touch with the community champion in your area. No questions I could see. Anybody? So, okay, thank you very much. Those written reports will be appended to the minutes. Thank you very much, community champions. We'll move on to item 10, which is the Community and Partnerships Committee agenda plan. Adrian, thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. No changes to the October agenda, but for November, we've been asked by the CUSP researchers if we can defer the item on tackling climate change to the January 2021 committee meeting, please. I think they've realised it's a huge task and there's more to be done on it, so would appreciate a little more time.
You can't tackle climate change overnight, can you?
Absolutely, clearly.
So no, I'm sure members will be happy with that, Adrian. Thank you very much. So we'll make that alteration. Thank you. Any questions on the agenda plan, members? Any comments? Nobody indicating. Okay, thank you very much. So we'll accept the agenda plan as is for the moment. So thank you very much. That brings the meeting to an end. Thank you for attending, and those that are home watching the meeting. And I now declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much, everybody.